All right, so now we're all the way to the semifinals, and Danny and Marty won the toss, and they were affirmative against the University of Kentucky. And the Kentucky debaters were two sophomores. And they, in a strange kind of way, had Danny and Marty's number. They were one of the few teams in the country who had a winning record against them. And they had beaten them on the negative a couple of times, so this was a little bit nerve-wracking. So the new affirmative we were sitting on, that I actually mentioned in a previous debate, got used in this debate, which was when the amendment kicked in and Egypt had gone 12 months without servicing its debt. The new plan let all of Egypt's aid get cut off except for the funding for this one demonstration project, desalination plant on the Nile. And then the only thing that we claimed as an advantage was water wars. We said the desalination plant, if it was built, if it went online, would stop a water war. So, what Kentucky does in the first negative is they run the most irritating topicality argument that I think I've ever heard or ever will hear. It's A, definitions, and they then defined 6 or 7 words from the topic. They defined foreign policy, and they defined substantially, and they defined change, and they defined Africa, and they probably defined United States. So we've got this list of definitions. Then B, violations. And there were, I swear to you, 12 of them. It took him a while to get through all this. Violation number 1, they violate United States because. Violation number 2, they violate substantially because. Violation number 3, they violate change because. And Danny is just livid because he's got to wade in and answer all this. So in the 2AC, he does his best. He reads counter definitions across from A, then he goes line by line through B, and he has 2 or 3 answers to each of them, and then he gets to their C, their reasons to prefer, and that's where he just lets loose about what a mess this topicality argument is, about how they're not genuinely serving any purpose in keeping the topic manageable with an argument in this shape. And then he's done with that, and he goes to the other arguments of the debate, which is the Russia disadvantage that Kentucky was quite good on and had actually just put Dartmouth out of the tournament in the quarterfinals. Dartmouth was running an Egypt affirmative, and Kentucky had taken them down on Russia, and Danny and Marty knew it. So Danny unloaded, made a whole lot of arguments, including a whole bunch of impact turns, and then went and got through the arguments made on the case as quick as he possibly could. So then, T.A. McKinney, the second negative from Kentucky, he pulls out one argument substantially, and he says, I have a couple of additional bits of evidence from our original definitions of substantially that I want you to hear. And he reads 2 or 3 of them, and the last one, gosh, I wish I could track it down, because it was so good it made almost everybody in the room gasp. Because it said something along the lines of allowing for a program to go away except for making an exception for one portion of it is not a substantial change. It effectively described the plan and said it wasn't substantial. And he goes through and he answers Danny's answers to the substantially violation, and he spends probably 30 seconds explaining why they made the argument quite the mess it is. It's a new affirmative. It's the semis of the NDT. They should be allowed some leeway and some license given that Baylor gives them no advance notice. It's a reasonable argument at this point, and still people are, kind of whispering to each other about how good that one piece of evidence was on the substantially portion. That one definition of substantially is so good and so tailored to the plan. So then he goes through the Russia debate, and I don't know what's going on. I don't know whether he hadn't had enough sleep or just what it was, but he keeps getting disoriented. And so he gets to maybe the 8th argument against Russia, and he starts to answer it, and then he stops and he kind of looks around, looks confused, and he says, okay, Calvin will answer that in the 1NR. Calvin's his partner. Then he starts to talk about the next one. Same thing happens. Gets confused again and says, okay, Calvin will take that one in the 1NR. And he says, okay, argument number 10. I can answer this one. And he gets a big laugh. Well, Calvin now has to spend a couple of minutes of his 1NR on what's left over from the Russia arguments, which means he doesn't get back to the case with nearly as much time as he wanted, so he misses a lot of it. So then, Marty, in the 1AR, if he devoted an entire sentence to that topicality argument, it would surprise me. He spent easily under 10 seconds on the topicality arguments. Then he burns through the case as quickly as he can, and then he goes to Russia. He's absolutely hung up on Russia. He has made the calculation that Kentucky will not dare to go for topicality in the semifinals of the national debate tournament, especially after the way they started that topicality argument. What he doesn't know, what he apparently didn't notice, is that when TA extended it in the 2NC, all of a sudden there's a feeling in the room, this is a good argument, and it's a dangerous argument. And if TA goes for it in the 2NR, he's probably going to win. So, I'm telling you, after the 1AR was over, in the prep time between the 1AR and the 2NR, ordinarily, in that setting, you would hear a lot of conversations going on. You could hear a pin drop. It was just dead silent. People were sitting on the edge of their seats. They wanted to know if TA was going to go for topicality. And he gets up, and he's road mapping, and he says, Russia, then the case. And all around the room, there's this groan of disappointment, and he just looks bewildered. He has no idea. He is as oblivious as Marty is. And I think the takeaway from this round is, if you can, pay attention in an elim round with a big audience, pay attention to the sense in the room. Don't be too driven by it. You still should go with your own instincts. But being completely tuned out to the impression you're making on the people who are watching is giving up a lot of opportunity. So, TA blows off topicality. He then starts on the case and then comes back to Russia, and he makes the same mistake that Georgetown had made in the octafinals, which is he doesn't get all the way to the end of Russia. He drops 2 or 3 impact turns. And so Danny gets up and gives this roaringly confident, and Danny has got a little bit of hang-up about Kentucky because they've lost to them a couple of times. Danny just gives this blazing with confidence 2AR about the impact turns on Russia, and then cleans up just fine on the case, and it is a quick 7-0. They did the strike card for the judges for the semis, and Baylor and Kentucky both had the same strikes. So instead of a 5-judge panel, there was a 7-judge panel, and it is a quick, unanimous decision. And one of the first things they say in the post-round discussion is that several of the judges had talked to each other after turning in their ballots, and they had agreed that if Kentucky had gone for topicality, that they easily had 5 ballots. And the other 2 said it would have depended on what the 2NR and the 2AR sounded like, but there were 5 judges who said there's basically nothing the 2AR could have said. And TA just looked crushed. And Danny was looking pretty relieved. So, semifinals of the NDT, Marty calculated, took a risk that Kentucky wouldn't dare to go for topicality, and he turned out to be right. And it's a good thing he was right, because if they had been a little more daring, that would have been the end of Baylor's tournament. But I will say I am thankful that it wasn't.